jumping in the backside of secants and cosecants. I asked you guys to start writing information down on number 2, yes? So I'm going to start and ask you center line.
Negative 2.5.
Okay, center line is negative 2.5. That is our D value. Amplitude. Okay, amplitude, absolute value of the A value out front, which is 0.5. Let's see, what do we normally do next? Period? What's our period? Okay, 2 pi over B. B is 4. So pi over 2. So 1 cycle of, I haven't even looked to see what we're graphing, secant has to fit in pi over 2. Okay, and phase shift. What about phase shift? Okay, C over B, so 4 pi over 4. And we're actually going to be going left with it, yes? Because opposite of the sign means we're going to think negative 4 pi over 4. So we're going to have a phase shift of pi going to the left. Okay, I forgot to remind myself. Oh well. This graph, because we have to go pi left, I normally try and make sure I keep all my information very far left because I end up extending this number line a little bit, but we'll make it work. Okay, do we have everything? Only thing I haven't talked about, what is it I'm graphing here? It's secant. What is secant?
Cosine.
Okay, we have to think cosine. So for cosine, we're going to be doing the valley, right? Okay, so my period is pi over 2. Okay, so if we think pi over 2, and I'm going to make this small because here's the deal, we have to go pi left, okay? So my period, if it's pi over 2, here's pi over 2. One period has to be broken into 4 pieces, right? So I'm going to take 0 to pi over 2 and break it into fourths. Now, what is that? What's half of pi over 2? A fourth. So what I would label here is that I've got a tick mark, pi over 4, a tick mark, pi over 2. Now, technically those tick marks would be 8ths if you wanted to go there, but we don't have to. So that's where we're going to have 1 cycle. But as we're labeling this number line, and I just realized I didn't label the vertical, did I? Don't let me forget to do that at the end. I jumped right into what my brain was on here. We're going to have to shift pi left. What is pi in relation to this pi over 2? Does that make sense? Pi is how many pi over 2s?
2.
It's 2 of them, yes? So as we go to move left, okay, so if I just reflect this piece, if I do 4 tick marks, what is that equivalent to? That's my pi over 2 in the negative direction. However, we have to be able to go pi left. Right now, I can only go pi over 2 left. What do I need to get to pi? We're going to need to double that, yes? Because pi over 2 and pi over 2 is pi. So then I'm going to need another 4 tick marks. And that puts me at negative pi. What would be halfway in between negative pi over 2 and negative pi? What's in the middle of a half and 1? 3/4. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that those little tick marks in between are 8ths, right? Well, if you count from 0 to negative pi, guess what? There are 8 pieces. So that should match up. Okay. Don't do what I did. I forgot to label up front, didn't I? Kind of works out better. Where's my center line going to be? Or what's my center line? It's negative 2.5. You can either label it off here to the left or right here in the center. I don't know. That's a hard one to label. Amplitude is 0.5. So that means we're going up a half and down a half, which puts me at -2 and -3. Okay. Now, and I will say, remind me, I have some sine and cosine papers to get back to you. I graded those last night. And so you'll get an idea of, you know, I didn't see major errors for the most part. They were just small things. So we'll get an idea of, you know, things that we need to improve on. There's silliness going on with the numbering of the number lines sometimes. So. Okay. Are we ready to graph? Okay. If I start, I'm going to go gray here and start with just my basic before I shift it. Then I need to make my cosine curve have a period of pi over 2, yes? Which means my cosine goes from what? 0 to pi over 2. And what's a typical cosine curve? Starts up high, cuts through at the first quarter, a minimum in the middle, cuts through at the third quarter, and maxes at the top, yes? But what do I really need to do? I need to shift it pi left. Are we okay with what I've already done? Yes, no? Okay. I'm trying to make sure the looks get resolved because I'm getting some looks of.
Yeah, I'm just.
Okay. Oh, you weren't the only one getting me a look, so that's why I was making sure we get them all resolved. Okay. Negative pi. That means whatever starts here at 0 is going to be where? It's going to be over here at negative pi. Now, another thing to look at. So my cosine graph was starting at 0 and it was ending where? It was ending at pi over 2. If you go pi left from pi over 2, where's that going to put my ending point? It's going to put me at negative pi over 2. So my cosine curve is going to fit between negative pi over 2, negative pi, and negative pi over 2. Does that make sense? And from there, I made my tick marks equal, so it's a max above negative pi. We're going to cut through the first one, a minimum under negative 3 pi over 4. We're going to cut through the middle, and we're going to have a max at negative pi over 2. Now, that puts me in the right position. I don't know if you guys realize, if we kept going and connected, do you realize that this would end up connecting to be the same graph? Are you seeing that connection? Okay. Does that always happen with a shift? No, it doesn't, which is why we have to. But if I were to keep going, okay, there's my max. So, well, I would cut through, min, cut through. Oh, hey, guess what? I would be matching up right there. So in this case, our phase shift just it scooted us over, but we're still on that same graph. Okay, just that you can't count on that always to happen. Now, we're not technically just graphing cosine though. We're graphing secant. What do I need to do with secant? We need some asymptotes here, don't we? Man, this is going to be small. Okay, so my asymptotes. I need asymptotes where my graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so my asymptotes are between negative pi and negative 3 pi over 4, and between negative 3 pi over 4 and negative pi over 2. And then what do we need to do here? Draw in your parabolas. I stated yesterday, and I don't know how much I clarified it, but I always want the equivalence of two parabolas. Well, we know there's a whole parabola here, right? In the middle, where that valley is, flip that valley, make it a upside down parabola. Minimum expectation here, and I will see it done both ways, is now what else? From this max point, which is an end, you would have a parabola, yes? Minimum expectation would be that you draw half the parabola there, and same thing over there. Does that make sense? Because now, since I've drawn one full parabola and two halves, did I just draw the equivalence of two parabolas? Now, if that's bugging you, what can you also do? You can finish these parabolas if you prefer. Just don't make all that side, because I didn't draw the next asymptote, did I? Don't make the side, those parabolas then go really wonky on the sides, right? You can leave them as halves. You can complete them like I just did. Your choice. Okay. That's minimum expectations. Could you go farther and do more? Sure. But minimum. Got it? Ready for 3? Okay, let's have at it. It's fractions, our favorite, right? I sense there's a no there. Okay. What you got for center line? Then after the parentheses, so my D value is 0. Amplitude. The A value out front is 4. Period. Okay, so it's 2 pi divided by b. B is the coefficient of x. Now, in this case, I wrote it as x over 2. So I don't want that x in there. That's not the coefficient. But when we think x over 2, that is the same thing as thinking 1/2 x, correct? You see it? So then, yes, we're doing 2 pi divided by my b value of 1/2. I think we just did this the other day, didn't we? 2 pi divided by 1/2. Keep change flip. 2 pi times 2 over 1 is 4 pi. I hope you guys can read that if you need to. I just realized I was writing really small there. And phase shift. What are your thoughts on phase shift? Okay. C divided by B, pi over 3 divided by 1/2, which becomes pi over 3 times 2 over 1, which is 2 pi over 3, left or right? Left. And I was throwing a negative in there because opposite the sign. And I need to either see a negative or the word left, or both, But I've got to have something indicating left. Let's see. Amplitude was positive, so there was no reflection, or A value was positive. What are we graphing? Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. What's a sine curve look like? Mountain valley, yes? Okay. With that in mind, let's do some labeling. Let's see. Let's start with the vertical axis like I showed last time. Center line is 0. Amplitude of 4. Which puts me at what? Up 4, down 4. I would not use that whole vertical axis to go up 4 and down 4 because we're in secant cosecant world here. Okay, what's my period? Period is 4 pi. Now, if I look, I'm going to be moving left eventually, aren't I? So I can use this whole thing for 4 pi. Okay, and this is the part that I'm still seeing some of you struggle with at times. Okay, we've got to be able to do our labeling. So 4 pi, I'm going to take 4 pi, which is one cycle, and break it up into fourths. So the middle of 4 pi is 2 pi. Got 1 pi and 3 pi. You guys good with my 1, 2, 3, 4 pi? Okay. Now, if you want, we can go ahead and draw in our basic sine curve before we shift it if we want. And, or we can go ahead and put in, because we're going to need some more marks to make this phase shift happen, aren't we? Okay. But if you want to go ahead and draw it in, just kind of my pre-phase shift version, what's sine going to do? It's going to start at the center, 0, 0, and then what's it do? The first place, what's that first place going to be? 1 pi, we're going to max at 2 pi. There's a 0. At 3 pi, there's a min. And at 4 pi, there's a 0. And I don't know. I don't always draw that in before I finish labeling, but. Okay. Phase shift of negative 2 pi over 3. We got to talk thirds now. What do you know about thirds? How many thirds make a whole? 3 thirds. So right now, my graph is labeled in terms of whole pies, yes? Which works nicely, actually. So what do I need to do to each pie? Break it into thirds, which means you make 2 tick marks. Okay? So in between each set of pies, I have 2 tick marks. So like, for instance, I'm not going to label them all, but on this first one, that represents what? Pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. I'm not labeling past that. I'm just giving, that's what it's representing. Now, we have to move left. Easiest thing to do on the left, we have to go at least 2 pi over 3 left. So either put 2 tick marks or go to negative pi and put 3 tick marks. Because I think what I did on mine is I kind of said, okay, I'm going to go to negative pi. But the idea, if I do 3 tick marks, here I'm at negative pi. So this is negative pi over 3, negative 2 pi over 3, and negative pi. Okay. Is that labeling making sense? Again, I definitely think that's the hardest part. What are we going to do with this graph? We'll get left 2 pi over 3, which is 2 tick marks, right? So it was starting at 0, 0. Now it's starting at negative 2 pi over 3. This max was above pi. If I move that left 2 tick marks, now it's going to be above pi over 3. Are you with me? We were crossing through at 2 pi. If I move back 2 tick marks, now I'm crossing through at the mark after pi. So I guess it'd be what, 4 pi over 3 if you want it? I did have a minimum below 3 pi. Now I'm going to have a minimum below the mark after 2 pi. So 7 pi over 3. I was ending at 4 pi, move it back, and I'm ending at the mark after 3 pi, which would be 10 thirds pi. Okay. Did you follow all that? based on the lopsidedness of my graph, something I definitely ended up a little off, but it happens.
Is it okay if we erase the original one, like before the phase shift?
You could.
Okay.
Yeah. And there may be times you don't do the original graph before the phase shift. It depends how much, it depends on the problem. It depends on your level of confidence. It takes time, but there's times that I'm like, okay, I'm doing this original for you guys, but I wouldn't necessarily do it on my own. There's times I'm still going to do the original on my own. So, okay, we're not done though. What are we doing? Asymptotes. There's 1, 2, and 3. And parabolas, yes? Since this is based off of a sine curve, you should have exactly 2 parabolas. Okay? This parabola is directly above pi over 3. This parabola is directly under 7 pi over 3. I mark right after 2 pi. Okay? Getting there? Are you guys all working on the next one? I'm like looking for eye contact. I mean, like no eye contact. Then I'm realizing, oh, some of you might still be finishing this one, but it looks like some of you are also working on the next one, which is good. Okay. Last one for me today. Center line is -5. What's the amplitude? 6. And if you're going to tell me the amplitude is 6, what should we also probably talk about this moment? Because you just told me positive 6, as you should have. That negative means there is a reflection. And that's going to be a reflection across the x-axis. Okay. Period. The formula is 2 pi divided by b. b is 2/3. So I'm going to do 2 pi, which 2 pi is a fraction. You can think 2 pi over 1. Keep, change, flip. So 2/3 becomes 3/2. In my brain, the 2's cancel out, and I have 3 pi. And phase shift. Phase shift is C over B. So opposite the sign. 2 pi divided by 2/3. Familiar? 2 pi divided by 2/3 again is 3 pi. Left or right?
Right.
It is going to be 3 pi to the right. Okay. Let's see. What are we graphing? Secant means I'm graphing cosine. Okay. Cosine is normally a valley. However, we had a reflection, so it's going to be a mountain. Okay. Let's see. Vertical axis. Center line is -5. Up 6 from -5 means I'm going to be labeling that as 1. Down 6 from -5 is -11. Okay. A period of 3 pi. With a phase shift of 3 pi to the right, which if I have a period of 3 pi, and I'm also shifting right 3 pi, that puts me at a total of 6 pi. Okay, now, we're going to label this carefully. Now, okay, if you think about this logically, if I have a period of 3 pi, but then I shift it over 3 pi, do you realize we're going to land on top of the original cycle? Sorry, guys. I have a never-ending cough that won't go away. So, with this in mind, I'm going to label this whole thing 6 pi. Okay, because a period of 3 pi, this is one you can't just leave a little spot to add that 3 pi, can you? Okay, now, I'm not going to break this all up into 1 pi's. I'm going to think logically. What's the middle of 0 to 6 pi? And that is 3 pi, and I want 3 pi. 3 pi is important because that's a cycle. So here's what I want you to do now. Forget 3 to 6 pi for a moment. 0 to 3 pi, that is a cycle. How many pieces does that need broken into? Fourths. So I'm going to break 0 to 3 pi in the middle. What is the middle of 0 to 3?
3.
Okay. The middle of 0 to 3 is 1.5, or 3 pi over 2. Now, you also need to take that 0 to 3 pi and then put in the middles of the middles. Okay. Which, oops. Middle of 0 to 3 pi over 2, well, middle of 0 to 1.5, 3/4, but I'm not going to label that. So, 0 to 3 pi is broken up into 4 pieces. What does 3 pi to 6 pi need broken up into? 4. What's the middle of 3 to 6? What's the halfway point of 3 and 6? If I count in from 3 and 6, there's 4 and 5. So 4.5. 4.5, if I make it improper, is 9 halves. So there's 9 halves. And then I put in my other 2 tick marks. Okay, let's do it. Officially, just think 0 to 3 pi for 1 cycle. Okay? So we have to get 1 cycle to neatly fit in 0 to 3 pi. Now, cosine normally starts up high, but it's reflected, so we're starting down low. That means we're starting down low, and at the end of the cycle, we are ending down low. So we're going to end below 3 pi. So I'm going to cross, max in the middle at 3 pi over 2, cross, and end under 3 pi. That technically is my initial cycle. But then what do we, again, I say technically need to do? Okay. We're going to go over pi over 2, or 3 pi. So what was starting at 0 is now starting at 3 pi. What was ending at 3 pi is now ending at 6 pi. Basically, what are we doing? We are continuing, yes? So we're low at 3 pi, cross, high at 9 pi over 2, cross, and we're low at 6 pi. Okay, the minimum expectation. Get your asymptotes in, which if we're looking at just the piece that matters, like this is your required expectation is the 3 pi to 6 pi. So I have to have those 2 asymptotes in. And then we have one lovely parabola in the middle. And officially, because this was secant, we have half parabolas there. Now, can you continue those?
Yeah.
You can continue those if you want. I don't require it though. Okay, and keep in mind, does that make sense? Because our next asymptote would be right there, yes? We'd have asymptotes there, so. Okay, guys. Getting the hang of it, yes? Let's stop that.